letter from the Speaker is around announcements of policy. They're going to change things that then are done before the House has been able to see that and then react and to scrutinise. And the example that was given, I'm just going to pick this out for time, on Thursday the 3rd of July, the government announced its 10-year plan for the NHS. A statement was scheduled in the House. However, as you were on your feet doing business questions, the Prime Minister, Health Secretary and the Chancellor were in East London launching the policy at a press conference. Why was the press conference held in the morning prior to the statement to the House? That press conference could have been held in the afternoon. That press conference should have been held, as per the Ministerial Code, in its first instance in Parliament. That was not compliant with the spirit, the intention and the word of the Code. You've made a number of times the feeling known that you don't know why you're here. And
that is absolutely not a feeling I've made.
That's my
okay,
take.
Well, I'm sorry if you've had that impression,
That's my
because
take.
that is not. I am really happy to be here and to
in that
answer
case,
these
my
things.
take is that you don't seem to see why you're here.
No,
so
that's not at
specifically
all.
on that question,
That's not at all.
What happened for that instance for the 10-year plan, and how do you stop it happening again?
Okay, the 10-year plan, which was a 169-page document, I think, was published to the House first. It wasn't given at that press conference. It wasn't the document itself. It wasn't a press conference about the whole document. It was a press conference about sort of plans for the NHS. But I take your I don't not take your point, and these are balances to get right. But the plan itself was published to the House. The statement was advertised to the House that morning, so colleagues had time to go to the vote office, get the full document, prepare, look at page 89 and find something in it that they didn't like, or they wanted to ask questions about, and put those to the Secretary of State, who then his oral statement, I think, lasted for about 2 hours, and obviously every colleague got in on that. So I understand what you're saying completely, and I really don't want to have given anyone the impression I do not want to be here. I'm here, and I'm here for a good long while, and I'm happy to do that, because I think these really are important matters to discuss and debate. I think I'm just trying to make the point that these things are subjective to some degree. There are trade-offs. We are endeavouring to do that in a way that balances the needs of members to have adequate time to study such documents, and therefore come in and ask of a statement, and for notice to be given of that statement in advance to the House, so that people can be aware and be around and all of that kind of thing as well, versus the need to kind of do media and trail things in the media and have media moments as well, because obviously you couldn't have a joint occasion of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and the Secretary of State all appearing at the dispatch box simultaneously, could you? Because that's not how we work.
You could have had that after.
You could have had that after, look, that's something we constantly sort of stress test and consider, like the logistics of that. The perhaps the reverse of that would be that obviously parliamentary business is not as predictable. So let's say that day there'd been a press conference with the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and at a hospital kind of nearby London, booked in at 2:00, and 2 urgent questions had been granted, and then we'd had business questions, and then we'd had a statement from the Secretary of State. That statement, either he would have missed the press conference altogether, or he would have asked the Speaker to curtail that.
Logistics thing to get the message out first and allow them to then come to the chamber to give the announcement.
Yeah, so there's just logistical things to do that. But what I want to be really clear about, which would have happened previously and was suggested as well, or not by the Secretary of State, was that actually the Secretary of State do that somewhere, and sometimes the Speaker will make the suggestion to me as well, that the Secretary of State do that, and simultaneously we'd have a junior minister in the House giving the statement. I personally want the Secretary of State in the House giving the statement, and I think colleagues will want to interrogate the Secretary of State.
On that point, I don't see the relevance of the fact that they've got a press conference organised, or that they've gone off to do a visit somewhere. The convention is the House has to be informed first. If the House has not been informed, under those circumstances, they should not hold the press conference, or they should not take questions after that visit. The fact that it is inconvenient for them is not relevant to the current convention. So we come back to the point, is the convention simply no longer relevant for purpose, in which case we should be looking at reform of that convention openly, or is it a case that they should not be doing any of these things because the House has to take precedence?
Well, look, I think just use your words carefully, because convention is not quite the same thing. Convention would be that, if we're looking at convention, that is custom and practice, that for many, many, many years, announcements go to the media and statements are made to the House later in the day, or when the House is then sitting. Big announcements are made in recesses, they're made in conference recesses, many of them, at other times, and the balance of that is, so that would be a convention, which is a different thing from what you're talking about, which is the ministerial code. And there is a balance to be struck there about giving colleagues time to read full documents, which are published to the House first, and that was on that occasion as well, was published to the House first, published in time for colleagues to read through it, really consider the issues, and then come to the Secretary of State, who is there for 2 hours answering questions on it. So I don't see that as a breach of the code. I just don't. I see that as being forthcoming to Parliament. But of course, we are going to have media and comms plans around that mean we can get our messages out to the wider public.
It may not be your interpretation of it, but a plain reading of the text, that would clearly be a breach. And I think the problem here is going to be that if ministers are allowed to have their own interpretation of what these things mean, if we look back at the Labour manifesto,
ministers don't have their own interpretation.
Okay, well,
because it's a collective agreement.
It is very clear here that in the first instance, all of these announcements should be made to the House. The fact that they will come to the House later, or that you might want a Secretary of State to be there, is not the current wording of what the code states.
That document was published to the House first.
Okay, it may well have been published to the House first, but we did not have any.
So therefore, it was published to the House first.
Okay, but we have instances.
And so we're having now a different conversation.
We have instances where announcements were made where documents have not been published to the House first. Or even if you don't accept that, the general principle here appears to be that there are complications with the current arrangements because we now live in a 24-hour media environment. I accept that. I accept that the current code and the current arrangements around this may not be acceptable. But what is incredibly frustrating, I think, for members of this committee here today is we're being told that on the one hand, ministers are entirely in keeping with decisions that are currently set out in the arrangements. And at the same time, these arrangements are no longer operating in line with the realities of the modern world of politics. And those two positions, I think, are actually incompatible. Either we need to have an open and transparent conversation around changing the nature of these principles because they're no longer suitable, or ministers have no excuses for not coming to the House to present first major announcements, before going off and dealing with the press. That needs to be resolved.
Okay, yet again, I would just gently say, yet again, we're throwing up here sort of binary straw men, which, as I hope in the last hour and a half I've tried to explain, is not actually how these things sort of work or what they're subject to. The ministerial code and the conduct of ministers is a matter for the Prime Minister. However, expectations of this House would always be, whatever is in the ministerial code or not, expectations of this House would be that ministers, senior ministers, would be forthcoming to this House and would be making available to this House first big major announcements of policy. And, I think if we're not accepting the premise that publishing a document to the House first, is it coming to the House first, then it's hard to sort of see where that conversation goes.
Don't forget to like this video if you're tired of politicians treating Parliament like amateur hour. Subscribe and click the bell icon for more accountability breakdowns, and drop your thoughts below.